Hello, I'm Gary Rose from Brigham Young University Marriott School of Management. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Lecture Series. Today, we're pleased to welcome Chuck Coonradt, Chairman of the Board and CEO of the Game of Work, Inc., a corporation founded in 1973 and dedicated to building the success of its individuals and corporate clients. A graduate of Michigan State University, Chuck is internationally recognized in the fields of goal setting and profit improvement. As an author, consultant, and speaker, Chuck's books, The Game of Work, Managing the Obvious, The 4 Laws of Debt-Free Prosperity, and Scorekeeping for Success have been labeled management must-reads. Over 1 million executives, managers, and supervisors on 5 continents have been exposed to Chuck's ideas and feedback, scorekeeping, goal setting, coaching, and accountability. Chuck and his wife, Carla, have 5 children, and so the Rollins Center of Entrepreneurship and Technology welcomes Chuck Coonradt to the Entrepreneur Lecture Series today. Well, thanks for attending.
Well, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
That's fine. I'm glad that you could get off the ski slopes and make it today.
Well, I did get a couple of runs in before I came down.
That's what I heard. Well, that's great. Well, we appreciate you coming. Today, I think, as we look out, this is really going to be a special event because here's an entrepreneur who started a service instead of developing products, and has been very successful. And I think a lot of people would like to know, that are starting services, because there's very minimum barriers to start a service, right?
Exactly.
You started your organization. How much did it cost to start your service?
Well, we had $1,500 in operating capital. We borrowed $1,000 sometime in the first year. It's all we could get, and the rest of it was bootstrap.
Oh, well, today's students have that on their credit card, so that's not a problem.
I understand that. I've also incubated, because of that low barrier, probably incubated another 4 or 5 competitors, none of whom I have an equity stake in. Yeah. So, yes, I know about low barrier to entry.
Well, let's start from the beginning. And so in 1973, you began your operations, but the real epiphany of what started what you're doing today was kind of a real interesting story. Would you tell us about it?
Yes, we started off as a franchise, and we were affiliated with a company out of Waco, Texas called Success Motivation Institute, founded in '59 by a guy named Paul J. Meyer, who's still today at 81, vibrant and excited, and one of my great mentors throughout my life, made a big difference for me. So we had this personal goal setting program of how to be more successful. I was a man who started out selling success, and it came with 8 cassette tapes, cost $750 if you didn't get the tape recorder. And I was making a call on a mid-level manager who brought me over to his, we were on the 2nd story, and he brought me over to his window. We looked down on the factory floor, and he said, "What are you and your little box going to do about that?" And that was 8 20-somethings working down there, siding a house. And their work pace could only be described as arthritic snails in wet cement. It was like, grab a hammer, find a nail. Boom, boom, boom. And he said, "What are you going to do about that?" And I didn't have an answer. I mean, I was just stymied. And then I got rescued by lunch, because the lunch bell rang, and the minute the lunch bell rang, they dropped those hammers like they were electrified, took off on a dead run like somebody had hit them with high-voltage cattle prods, about 50 yards down a factory floor, 4 of them peeling their shirts off, to where they found a basketball hoop. And I watched those 8 snails turn into rockets, and they played with the intensity of a Game 7 NBA Finals for 42 minutes. Everybody knew what to do. There wasn't a manager, a coach, an official, anyway. It all worked. And at 12:42, game ended. They started walking back down. No sense to run now. Eating their lunches as they did. 1 o'clock, they were back on the clock, arthritic snails and wet cement. And my epiphany was what would happen if you took and captured what we came to call the recreation, or the motivation of recreation, the intensity that I saw underneath that basketball hoop, and transform it down the factory floor. Could we get an improvement in productivity? And it turns out we were right. So for 35 years, that's been our deal.
Well, we want to know the secret. I have students that do so okay in class, but when they're out of class, that's when they really shine.
Yeah.
So we got to get the same problem fixed here.
Well, the principles really quickly,
okay,
because I think that's valuable for our audience, is number one, we found out that the feedback is more frequent in recreation than it is in work. So if you go out to the tennis court or you go to the golf course, if you go play golf for 4 hours, you're going to wind up with feedback, depending on your game, 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 times. But it's instantaneous. It's right there. Whereas on a job, sometimes you can be on the job for 4 hours and not know what the shape of the ball is.
Right.
So that was one of the things that I learned after we wrote the book, is that the power of feedback. And if you're looking to become an entrepreneur, recognize that every day, everybody needs to know whether they've won or lost.
Oh, on a daily basis?
On a daily basis. Because when you increase the frequency of feedback, you increase, and this is like an aspirin, I don't know why it works, but when you increase the frequency of feedback, you increase both the quantity and the quality of the performance. And for those of us in a traditional organization where you spend 50, 40-hour weeks, work 2,000 hours a year for 20 minutes worth of performance appraisal, whoa, sad deal, really sad deal. If you're going to build your own business, don't wait that long. I mean, it has got to be daily or weekly. So it's everybody wants to win every day and increasing the frequency of the feedback. That's number one.
So startup companies, by nature, they're small and they're getting that feedback.
Yeah.
And as they grow, then that becomes problematic.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're starting up, it's easy, right? Any cash? So
who's going to buy lunch today?
That's right. Check your credit card balance. Go online, check your balance, see if we can have lunch. Yeah. So, I mean, it's always an immediacy when you build your own business, but then you get into, a company that's got several billions of dollars and thousands of employees, and the question is always, well, how do I fit here? How does what I do make a difference?
Yeah, great. So and you went from that to the game of work to managing the obvious. Okay, tell us a little about that. But writing these books is what really developed your consulting firm, is that right? And
well, we found out that books really add credibility, and that this concept of being an author is really a big deal. And so, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. It's a real pain in the tail, to be perfectly honest with you. It takes, 2 years to write them. Yeah. Writing books is like elephants having babies. It takes like 2 years of gestation. And there's no real guarantee, because there's 1,000 new books. Well, there's actually now 1,500 new titles of new books written every week. And the average, if you were thinking about being an author, here's a good number for you. The average hardcover book that gets published, okay, will sell 750 copies in its lifetime.
The average?
The average. So you take a blockbuster with, I guess Game of Works something over 250,000 copies now, and we're not a blockbuster. But you start to take Chicken Soup for the Soul, which Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen did, and I contributed 2 or 3 of those. They've done millions of copies. Well, you take that and contrast it to averaging 750. Right. Not a good deal.
But it's not for the mass market. I mean, you developed this book to develop credibility for your organization for what you do, right?
Sure, it's a silent salesman.
Yeah.
And you put that book in the hands, and then we came up with another quick concept. We did a mini book, and the mini book was the introduction in the first chapter.
Oh, okay.
And we did it just to hand out to people, and we do it electronically, and it's
kind of a teaser.
Just a teaser.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So, and when you started the service, it was just you?
Oh, was it just me? It was. My poor wife was working, had a full-time job. We started the company with 2 metal file cabinets and an old desktop that I bought from a company in Salt Lake City. Turned them upside down, screwed the desktop into the 2 file cabinets. We had that and an answering machine, and that's where we worked. But I did have a mobile phone.
Oh.
1970.
Those were quite big back then.
They were huge. They were like this, and there were 4 lines. If you had a mobile phone in the state of Utah, there were 4 lines that you could be on. I mean, 4 people could be making a mobile phone call then. So, and you had, this is weird, but you had to click it, because you had to tell it you were hanging up, because the whole drill was you and like 300 other people were all trying to get on those 4 lines.
Okay.
But
it's good. So giving...
make sure you get a mobile phone. Like that's a problem for this group.
Yeah, that's right. Well, then next you had managing the obvious, right? And one of your strategies was, as you were developing a consulting firm, is put out books that cover an issue so you could get in and do training. And you mainly trained what? executives, salespeople? I mean,
Yeah,
what was it oriented towards?
We focused, if you want to look at the game of work generically, game of work was really a leadership development principle, tool, concept. So we recognize that in organizations, and this doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter whether you're in the church or you're in your own home ward or branch, or you're running General Motors, okay? Fundamentally, organizations rise or fall based on the interaction between a coach and their team. So the way people judge an organization is almost always judged by the way they feel about the person they report to. And one of the challenges for entrepreneurs, and one of the things that I would say you have to do, is you've got to build it. You got to give it away. If you don't give it away, then you wind up being just a sole practitioner. Sole practitioner will never be a business. You'll just be a practice. But in doing that, you have to make sure that as you add another layer of management in your organization, that you don't give away the culture, and that those people you hire to be leaders in your company treat the rest of your company with the same kind of intensity, professionalism, and the rest of it that you would do if you could talk to everybody.
Yeah. What did you do before? I mean, you just didn't come out of school and become an entrepreneur, right?
Well, my degree qualifies me in absolutely no way to do with what I do now. I was raised, both my grandfather and then my stepfather were both in the supermarket business. And so my first work experience was bagging potatoes when I was 7 years old to get a bicycle. It was the greatest lesson I ever learned, okay? My degree from Michigan State is in supermarket operations. So I'm a box boy with a sheepskin. But it was a very select industry-sponsored program, ton of scholarship money, which was good because my dad went broke when I was a senior in high school. And I went to school on super values money and on Kraft Foods money for a couple years and worked my senior year. But I got hired into supermarket operations. And then I met, as I said earlier, the people from Success Motivation Institute, spent $750, started to do my own goals, realized that that was something that really resonated with me, and early on decided that I wanted to be in a position where I spent my life helping people become better than they could be and help businesses as a result of it.
Kind of an interesting path that we see common with entrepreneurs. You went to work for an organization and you saw where there were opportunities. And then when one of those opportunities came available, you said you jumped on it.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate.
Okay.
Probably a little higher level than
really
happened, but that's a good story.
You started with your $1,500.
I borrowed from my mom.
I borrowed from your mom and went to work, huh? Okay, Managing the Obvious. Book number 2, is that right?
Yeah. Well, the game of work did so well, we thought we were magic. That's another thing to learn as an entrepreneur, okay, is that one hit does not automatically generate another one. And so Managing the Obvious was a collection of thoughts. We want to talk a lot about goal setting, some of the other things that we want to find.
But if you were a startup company in that, how would they apply what's in that book? And because you were teaching in leadership again, right?
Yeah, well, Managing the Obvious is really more about how you discover what the obvious is. One of the things that we get, and I'm not taking a shot at the accountants.
Well, no, that's okay. You can.
Okay, I'm taking a shot at the accountants. But if you look at today generally accepted accounting principles, it is like everything that they look at is done. I mean, it's over. Okay, so it's like getting out and trying to drive a Porsche Turbo and only look in the rearview mirror. So. So our approach has been, and one of the things that we decided and discovered in Managing the Obvious was there's a whole section in there on what to do if the obvious isn't. And it's how to figure out what's wrong with your business just before it starts to show up. Okay? So there were, if you look at, for example, the Madoff scandal, $50 billion gone away. And one of the things you hear about is there's been this investigator who for 2.5 or 3 years saw the early warning signs of that and was trying to tell the SEC this guy was a bad guy. Okay? So you really want to be aware of looking at where those trends are and finding things out that are early on.
Okay.
Early inception.
So the 4 laws.
Oh,
how did that do?
That was a fun book.
Okay.
The 4 laws might might become the blockbuster. I mean,
Oh,
it still
okay.
could be.
So the third was better than the second.
No, the third was better than the second. Anything was better than the second, Gary. But we could make this group a real deal because we've got some.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we're over 750.
Did you bring some of the second books to
No,
hand out?
no,
Okay,
they're down
yeah.
at Deseret Industries. But no, a client came to us, and they were in sort of the spending management.
Right.
I wanted to call the book Spend It Rich, but I got overridden. But so the 4 Laws of Debt-Free Prosperity takes the principles in the game of work and applies them. Sort of the game of work meets the richest man in Babylon in the 90s.
Okay.
And it just is all about track what you spend, trim what you spend, train yourself in what the realities are, and then apply what you're doing and set some goals to get it done. So it's a great book.
Right, yeah. And then after that was Scorekeeping for Success.
Scorekeeping for Success was written because people came to us and said, you know, I understand feedback. The other principles are scorekeeping is better in recreation than it is in work. That's principle number 2. Number 3, the goals are more clearly defined. 4, the coaching's more consistent. And 5th, there's a higher degree of personal choice.
Yeah.
But people said, I just don't understand how I can keep score about what I do. And so we wrote that as kind of a manual.
Okay. So kind of looking back, and then, you know, we won't have time to go through all of them, and then Better People Leader and those kinds of things. If you look at all the things you've done, and of course our audience is entrepreneurs, entrepreneur students, and entrepreneurial people with which want to start companies, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things you would tell them? What's kind of lessons learned? I mean, not only you started a company, but you wrote about issues on how to make companies better. What are some of a few things you might summarize for them that would really help them?
I think there's a couple of them. One is we talked a little bit about it before, but in order to sustain it, you have to give it away. If you're going to do anything, no matter how good your original idea is, it has to have additional people who make that happen.
Now, by give it away, you mean inject that same...
You've got to inject some enthusiasm, but you've also got to be willing to give it up. See, for a number of years, I thought I was the only one that could present these.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that was true.
Well, it was, but it was stupid. It was just stupid. So, and we got excited about the complexity of it, which is what entrepreneurs do. One of the other people you have to get impact from is Michael Gerber. Gerber wrote a book called The E-Myth. It's an absolute classic. And what Michael said is that too many entrepreneurs spend too much time working in their business and not enough time working on their business. And for years, I was a poster child for that because I thought I had to do it all myself. Well, it wasn't until we started to offload it and delegate it and gave it, and in the very best years of our business, I was only doing about 10 to 15% of the presentation. And the greatest shock in my life was that the other guys were getting better scores on their performance. But
it's kind of like the idea you
soft
hear.
Audiences, I thought.
Yeah. To gain control, you have to give up control. It's
Absolutely.
one of those things people don't understand.
Sure.
But we see some startup companies in which the CEO and everything is micromanager.
Mm-hmm.
And that works for a certain level of growth, and then it becomes a negative factor. And you've seen that in companies, and especially large companies.
Oh, sure.
If you can't do it. Okay, what else? That's a great insight.
So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is you have to figure out what's going to happen to it at the end. And again, this is not my original thought, it's just anybody can figure this out.
Right.
If you look at, for example, in the best business book that's been written in the last 50 years, not mine, but a book called Good to Great that Jim Collins wrote, Collins went out and looked for, now think about this, he looked for companies that could meet this good to great criteria. But here's the thing I want you to think about. He went out and looked at the New York Stock Exchange 500, top 500 companies. Over a 15-year period of time, there were 1,400 companies that appeared in that 500 at one time or another.
In and out, kind of.
In and out. So what you recognize is that most companies won't last 10 years.
Wow.
Not
Good
just
point.
startups. That's the average. Most companies won't last 10 years. So when Collins wrote his book Built to Last, which was the great sustainable
Right.
company, But he had to look at 1,400 companies who at one time or another were in the top 500 over that 15, maybe more than 15-year period of time. So your company is going to go away. Now, when I started my company, what was I, 30, in my early 30s, late 20s, you know, I didn't ever think about that. Well, now I'm where it's going away, you know. So there's only three things that'll happen, okay? You either sell it, or you, which is what we ultimately did a year ago, and so now we're
to Molina Healthcare,
on
right?
that nice end of the deal. Yes, it's nice to go from being an entrepreneur to having stock in a New York Stock Exchange company. That's really a good deal.
A safer bet.
Even though today the Dow is, well, we won't talk about that. But
bad news.
So you either sell it, and then you have to trust the people you sell it to perpetuate what it is that you wanted to do. That's one. Number two, you do succession planning with it. So you turn it over to either family members, and two good examples of that locally are USANA, which is run by a good friend of mine, Dave Wentz, but that came out of a company started by his father, Dr. Myron Wentz, and so there's a succession planning. Right. The second one, tragically, but very much in the limelight, is the Larry H. Miller Organization, which Greg will now run, and which they've been working on and transitioning and planning. And the third thing that'll happen is it'll just die. It'll just go away. So one of the things you have to do, looking from Dr. Covey's thoughts, is you have to begin with the end in mind. What is this thing going to look like as I exit it? And that's a strategy that if you don't do it in the first week you're in business, because most of the things you're working on are survival, profit, and growth in that order, but you got to figure out what it's going to look like at the end. So I think that's another thing that all entrepreneurs ought to take a look at.
And you did the same thing, right? You tell us about that process, because I know people talk about it, but how did you do that? I mean, not clearly when you were just first starting your company, you didn't think, because many entrepreneurs don't know where they're going.
Oh, you have no clue.
They have no clue.
They have no clue. But first, you know, if you make it for 5 years, there is some evidence that you're doing the right thing. I mean, you just ought to go back and do that. And what people say, what are you proudest of? I said, survival. I mean, because having an organization that lasted for more than 30 years, provided thousands of jobs, provided thousands of people with income, sent people to school, bought houses, did all of those kinds of things. Survival, you know, that's not bad. That's because a lot of companies haven't. But I think by the time you're in business 5 years, you need to be looking at what that thing is going to look like at an end point. And once you start to look at it as an end point, like any other good goal setting, then you start to identify, what do I have to do coming backwards to get ready for that exit event. So my children, for example, whether it was because I worked too hard at it or not, but they've all got other careers. They are somewhere else and having a good time at it. And so that didn't fit in our particular organization. You can also sell it to your employees if you don't mind not getting paid for it, because there's every indication that they would have a hard time running it without you. And no matter how much you delegate, give away, etc., you sort of become that keystone. And when you pull the keystone out, the arch doesn't stay together very long. So we looked at that option, and we took a couple of runs at that. And then we ultimately decided that one of two things would happen. We'd either wind up in that wind down category, and I'd go back to being a single sole proprietor coach, if you will, or we had to get it to a point where it had value in the marketplace. And once we identified that, we found value in the marketplace, and I now have a terrific exit strategy and having a good time.
Well, yeah. Skiing up in Park City.
Well,
that's a tough job.
Hope my boss isn't going to see this, because I was really not supposed to be off today. So, yeah, that's the other thing, is that when you sell it, you get a boss. And fortunately, I got a great one, but it is a different kind of a process. So.
Right. What's and we just have another minute on this, and thanks so much for coming today. As you look back, what's been most fulfilling? I mean, you mentioned, is it knowing that you provided jobs and opportunities for other people? I mean, as you kind of look back of starting this in, 1973 and selling it in 2008, what's been the most fulfilling part of the journey?
I think there's probably two. I mean, number one is the idea of watching people grow in our business.
Okay.
We actually had a BYU student work for us.
A good one?
Yes, a good
good,
one.
okay.
But quick story, and and I won't give you his name, but he was an Olympic athlete.
Okay.
Gave up on the Olympics and went on his mission. Came back, but his competitive skills would have allowed him to compete. So
Right.
gives you
Okay.
a sense of quality.
Yeah.
Came in and we said it's a marketing internship. Well, he knew what marketing meant. It was like you buy advertising. No.
Oh.
You pick up the phone. And he said, no, I can't. I don't know what we're going to do. I said, it's just like skiing bumps. You know, it's one mogul at a time. Let's see how you can do it. But he went from that point in time. Bumped into him 2 months ago.
Okay.
He's now the director of marketing for a company that's got 700 people and growing rapidly. And to watch that kind of growth is number one. The other thing that's great is to watch an individual client. We had something north of 3,000 client companies over the period of time we did business. And watching those people take 5 simple principles, apply it to what makes sense, and then build their business. So I'm a growth freak.
Yeah. Good thing to be. Okay, it's now time to allow the students here today to ask questions. And would you speak loudly when you raise your hand, and you can call on them.
Are the cameras still? Are the
The
cameras
cameras are still rolling.
Whoa.
So where did you get your inspiration to write most of your instructional books? Do you feel like you gain that from your personal life, your experience, or where do you feel that you're authorized to make certain suggestions or gain that inspiration?
Oh, I'm not authorized at all. I'm more than anything else, we just tried stuff and it worked. I think if there's anything, that original epiphany was what was going on, and then we started to put some meat on those bones and said, oh, okay, well, first we thought it was goals. That's, if you read the game of work, we lead with goals.
Yeah.
We thought, yeah, it's the presence of a goal. That's the key thing. Then we recognized that it wasn't the goal as much as it was measuring the progress to the goal, something about progression and that sort of thing. And then we realized that as you're looking at that progression, those milestones, that the scorecard had feedback built into it as almost as indigenous to the process. And so it's been mostly a question of observation in the role.
And isn't that true that if we look at entrepreneurs, we see the pattern as they come on here and speak, and that they just tend to see things other people don't. I mean, it was right there. You observe this going on, but the epiphany to you was, how come they're more intense playing basketball than they are, putting the siding up, et cetera?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I will tell you that there's a company, you all know the Central Utah Journal, right? Yes? Is
Some
that
do.
still in place?
Some do, yeah.
Okay. The family that ran that gave us a chance to do some work for them. And when they came back, they said, you ought to write a book. I mean, so I didn't even think of writing a book with myself the first time. And so the family that runs that's the Oldham family, and Don Oldham was the second generation. He said, you ought to write a book. I said, I don't know how to write. So they gave me a contract, said something about royalties, and provided a guy by the name of Lee Nelson, who wrote Storm Mountain Testaments. And I think that's the name of the story.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Lee unmangled my manuscript, and so without him, I wouldn't be here today. So yeah, but you're right. We all get these things that pass through our lives, and sometimes it's just a question of reaching out and getting it done. Thomas Jefferson said, I believe in luck, and I found out that the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Okay, next question. Okay, I think one of the questions they want to ask is, you're the entrepreneur and you wear suits and you wear boots. And I was noticing coming in, those are the nicest looking boots that I have. Is that part of the
These
the
guys,
dress code for entrepreneurs? Is that?
Yeah, I'd rather be wearing blue jeans, but I thought, we might ought to try to be on the honor code system at least here while we're here. But I love wearing boots and suits, and I've worn boots to all of my kids' weddings, and I especially like wearing them back east because everybody goes, what are you doing? The great thing about boots is you don't have to worry about what color socks you have on. So,
Okay.
yes, Jen.
Talk about giving positive feedback for when people are progressing in their goals. What kind of positive feedback do you give? What kind of rewards do you give to people when they accomplish goals?
Well, I think one of the least understood principles is thank you. And you see, our whole culture, if you think about it, and I'm not sure that we don't do some of that to ourselves with the be therefore perfect, is that we have a tendency to look at the misses and the whoopses.
Yeah.
So you want to have your, FedEx wants your package to arrive on time and safely, right? There are reports called late and missing shipments. If you've ever been a cashier in a supermarket or a teller in a bank, they want you to be accurate. And there are reports called overs and shorts. You got to screw up to get listed. If you go to work in any industrial company, they want you to have a safe experience. And if you have a safe day, what they say to you is nothing. Now, if you have an accident, we got a committee, donuts, hot chocolate, we got all that stuff. So we screw it up. The fundamental thing is that if you ever trained a puppy, you know this, is that you got to reinforce the behavior you want repeated. Now, that is the most often espoused violated principle in American business. Reinforce the behavior you want repeated. I have a rule called the rule of mostly, and that is that most folks do most of what they do mostly right most of the time, most places.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it won't be the same.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
You just got to get some mostlies in there. But the principle is that if that's true, then most of the feedback we get ought to be in the part about what we've done. Okay? And so the real key is, I'll tell you a little, is this going to get broadcast?
Yes, so we want to hear.
Okay. On Saturday night, in a large building in Salt Lake with a statue on the top, I work. I'm an ordnance worker in the Salt Lake Temple. Come any Saturday night, we start at 2:15. We get a prayer meeting. Every day in the prayer meeting, we get congratulated on the fact that we did not make any recording errors the previous week. You didn't make any mistakes. I cannot get our leader to tell us how many we did right. It's just we didn't make any mistakes. And that's typical. I mean, you're now in the most inspired organization, we still fall into that sort of thing. So make a big deal out of the good stuff you want more of. That's one of the principles.
Good point. Good point. Other questions?
Mr.
Yes.
Price.
The basketball metaphor, and the factory workers went out and played basketball. What was the end of that story?
Well, the end of that story was that as we started to get our arms around what the principles were, we actually went back to that company, took those principles and got it back down on the factory floor. And here's my favorite story about that industry. As most of you know, how many of you here were born in the state of Utah? Okay. So in Utah, you know that there is a religious holiday that takes place on the third weekend in October. And it's called the Hunt.
Oh, I was going to say.
Okay. And there is some evidence that it's better attended than other religious experiences within the state. Not so much today, but early in the 70s, when we had less than 1 million people in this state, we sold 250,000 deer tags, and 80,000 deer would get shot every year. So we're in the manufactured housing company, and we now know how many square feet of housing we're producing a day, and it's the Hunt, and the workers want to go early for the Hunt. So I go to the plant manager and I say, if we get a week's worth of production done, can we close and let them go? And he said, well, if we get a week's worth of production done by Friday noon, we'll close. And I said, that won't work. He said, if we get a week's worth of production done, can we leave? Okay. They left at 1 o'clock Wednesday.
Oh.
Now, obviously, we were doing some things, helping each other out, getting it done. But it demonstrated the principle of having clearly defined goals, getting the team organized and effort. So we did move the basketball stuff onto the factory floor.
And they got a lot more feedback each night.
Oh,
on
yeah.
How much better they were doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you do that on a daily basis, if you start a business, you really do want to get your people to where they know whether you're winning or losing daily. And I get a lot of pushback from that, probably in the 35 years we're in business. More pushback around frequent dynamic feedback than anything else. But I will, I'll go to my grave telling you that the more of that you do and the more frequently you give that interval, the more enthusiasm you get in an organization.
That's great.
Great question. Thank you.
Other
I
questions?
think any question that allows me to tell some war story is a great question. Yes?
For some of us who maybe don't start out opening a business right away but go to work in an organization, what are some things that you think we could apply from your lessons that you've learned?
I think the first thing that you apply is you define what your job is and what your deliverables are. What is it that you make? I don't care if it's I don't care if it's a properly answered phone call and you're a receptionist. Figure out what you make. Figure out what your deal is. Because here's what I want you to understand. You are all going to spend your entire life as independent contractors. You are only going to rent or lease your skills to your company. Now, if you take that mindset and say, here I am, and what I do is I pay claims in an insurance company. I process this to this. I'll tell you another quick story. A good friend of mine's doing some automated loan processing software. If you go out and fill out an application for a credit card, it cracks your score up, okay? They've done the same thing, and they've done it with commercial lending. So they went around their entire multi-branch system to find the best loan processors they could find. And they found, I don't know if her name was Jenny or not, seems to me that it was, in Arizona, and she was about 3 times as productive as anybody else. Didn't matter what the complexity, didn't matter what the magnitude of the loan was, she just did it. So they started talking to her coach, her manager. Said, what is it? He said, well, Jenny rings the bell. What does that mean exactly? I've been in a lot of sales forces. You got a bell. Every time you get a contract, you go ring the bell. I said, so where's the bell? They said, well, there really isn't a bell. Then how does Jenny ring the bell if there's no bell? Jenny rings the bell in her head. Now, she's not dingy. That's not the point here, okay? The point was that Jenny, not part of corporate OD, redesign, organizational development, game of work client, anything else, Jenny had figured in her head there was a celebratable event that she had in terms of who she was. So that's the number one thing, is make sure that you're feeding yourself. And the other thing I would say to you is this. When you're working, you need to have a celebration fund. No matter how much money you make, you need 1% for you. Now, pay tithing with the first 10, save the second 10. That's the first 2 laws of financial stability, okay? Third one is learn to live on less than you make. Fourth is don't touch the principal when you put it away, okay? You got to have those 4. But you need the celebration fund. And I don't care if you're making $7 an hour, okay? Take 7 cents out every hour, put it in the celebration fund. Figure out some milestone that you're going to hit, and when you hit it, you're going to reward yourself. Now, when you get started with this principle at $7 or $8 or $9 an hour, it might be a Sunday at McDonald's instead of the 99-cent cone. It might be dinner out with your sweetheart. It might be a new shirt. It might be anything. It might be something you're going to buy anyway, but tie it together. And when you get there, go celebrate it, and then do something with the prize so that you remember it. We used to do this called get a record for your record. Records. That's there were big flat things before cassettes and
now,
CDs.
Chuck.
You get them. But what we would do is even if it was a cassette tape or CD, it's probably a little harder to. But we'd suggest to the people that we were working with, take a label, and on that, someplace on that surface, put down the event and the time frame that you achieved with that. so that when your sales weren't going well, for example, you just put all of these CDs or records on and you'd listen to them, you'd think about all the good stuff that you had. So set your own goals. Remember you're an independent agent. Nobody owns you. And 3, make sure you got a celebration fund.
Great. We still have another time for more questions.
Yes, sir.
When you were writing your books, who did you want as your readers? Who was your target audience?
Primarily people who had other people working for them. I mean, one of the things I love is an entrepreneur who's frustrated, feels like he or she is the person that's working the hardest in the organization and doesn't know how to inspire the people around them. You put me in a room with that and I will show you the most amazing surgical procedure in the world. It's called a walletectomy. It allows me with just the sharpness of this tongue to take that wallet right out of his hip pocket and get the down payment from it. Because I am more than anything else a salesman. And I just love selling. I love selling ideas, but I love getting a deal.
We would have never guessed that today.
No.
I'm glad you told us.
Well, it's because I bought
appreciate
it.
that.
Put a suit on. So. You ought to see me selling a shirt.
Okay, one more question.
Going once, going twice. I got a free book for the person who asks the next question.
The second one you wrote.
No. This is we get a first one.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
If you had to do it again, would you enter the service industry or would you find another industry to go with?
I think if I had to do it again, what I would do is I'd dumb it down, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I would simplify it so that more people could teach it. I mean, it would take us about 2.5 years to get a facilitator, somebody that we could send into a company to do the job. I think if I had to do it over again, I'd probably do 2 things. Number one is I'd make it simpler, okay? Because our facilitators, for example, compared to somebody who can roll out a Franklin time management program, our guys and gals got paid a lot more. It was a lot more complex, but it was a lot easier for the Franklin folks to multiply that, so I'd make it more multiple. Second thing I'd do is I'd make it more self-generating, more repeat business.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate it.
Thank
Let me
you.
just kind of summarize.
Thanks for these good people.
Yeah.
They were great.
Let me kind of summarize what I think. I think what Chuck brings to us today is that here's an entrepreneur with a tremendous amount of passion, as all of them have been. But more interestingly, he's starting a service. Low barriers to start. The key thing in starting a service is how to become credible, right? I mean, you go in, you can't just say things. You got to have some kind of reason to believe. And your books gave you that, right? Your books
Yeah, but not initially.
Not initially, huh?
Initially, we had to just figure out that what we did worked.
Right.
And we had to sell ourselves on it, and we had to use the stuff that we did originally. I mean, that was another big part of it.
Right. And you have to be good in sales. I mean, if you look at the pattern of successful entrepreneurs, they're not only passionate, and like you said, you have to be able to sell your idea to other people. I mean, they clearly sell it to themselves. And you loved what you were doing.
Oh, yeah, we had a great time.
Great time, great travel. So thank you so much for coming today.